So here's the deal. I want to tell you a story. The setting is 1975. And a very interesting young engineer named Stephen Sasson has come up with the most fascinating invention. Anybody know what I'm talking about? The year is 1975, and Stephen Sasson has created the first ever digital camera. Now, a lot of people know the story, but what they may not know is some context to it. It's ironic because Stephen Sasson worked for Kodak, which at the time was the largest film and photography company in the world. So imagine this, right? In 1975, Stephen Sasson brings the first ever digital camera to the board. Quite heavy, almost brings it in a wheelbarrow. Sets it in front of the board and he says to them, I present you the first ever digital camera. And the board says, that's very cool. What can it do? And here it is. The first ever digital camera could take a black and white 0.01 megapixel shot in 23 seconds. Yes, as you can understand, highly underwhelming. The board looked at us, thought this was very cute, and said to Stephen Sasson, come talk to us when this has some kind of meaningful progress. As you can imagine, he couldn't bring it back the next year when this thing could suddenly take 0.02 or 0.04. This wasn't worthwhile. I want you to fast forward with me to the year 1996. At this point in time, Kodak has a market capitalization value of $28 billion with 95,000 employees. They're making all sorts of money because they own every part of the value chain. And if you think about that value chain, just go with me for a second. Unlike today, not everybody had that specialized type of camera. And if they did, they didn't have it with them. Do you agree? 96? Second of all, even if you had the camera and you had it with you, you needed a specific type of film. 24 or 36 exposure film to be exact, which meant your shots were limited and you had to be very careful with each one because regardless of whether they were blurry or not, you had to pay for every shot that was exposed. And more interestingly, even though they were severely underwhelmed by the digital camera, they patented the technology, which meant that up until 2002, anybody who manufactured a digital camera had to pay Kodak royalties. They were cleaning up. Interesting to note that in 1996, at the height of their powers, that digital camera started to break the whole barrier number in terms of megapixels. In other words, this thing started improving 1 megapixel to 2 megapixel to 4 megapixel to 8. This was a rate that the traditional or legacy technology just couldn't keep up with at all. And the world took note. Indeed, a few early adopters started using it. Kodak kept their eye on it. But here's the truth of the matter. In 1996, the world simply wasn't developed the way it is now. People didn't have social media websites. They didn't have review sites. So this information wasn't getting out sporadically. And people were still scared of change, so they held on to the legacy technology. And with that came the death of Kodak. Do you want to know why? Because they didn't take that technology seriously. If you fast forward a few years on, this is still going, right? A few early adopters are using it, but nothing crazy in 1996, 1998, 2000. In what feels like a blink of the eye, in 2001, there was a major shift. Suddenly all the stores just conveniently started packaging or keeping digital cameras. Why? Because the price performance started to double or drop every single year. It just became cheaper and cheaper to use. One of the unexpected things that happened to Kodak, it wasn't just that the digital camera became digitized. It was that storage became digitized. And when the world fully cottoned onto this idea, what felt like but a moment was really the rumblings of years and years of movement that those people could not see. What resulted is that in suddenly around 2001, 2002, almost no one from a commercial perspective was suddenly buying the traditional cameras. And in fact, what digital cameras started to do was open up new markets where there weren't one. I wasn't a photographer, but at about 18 or 19, it was very easy for me to suddenly get hold of a digital camera. This meandered along for years. With dwindling sales, the stock market price absolutely faltering. In 2012, Kodak, the beloved company that had been over 100 years old, filed for bankruptcy. It's ironic because in the exact same year, in 2012, Facebook acquired Instagram for $1 billion. It was a startup that was only as old as 18 months and only had 13 employees. I want you to contrast those two with me for a second. My name is Mark Sham. I really do want to have this conversation with you, not only today, but after. And I want to spread this notion to you that you have to, without question, start to fall in love with change. The theme being let's look ahead at 2025. That is a frightening amount of time in today's world to look forward to, because truth be told, we don't even know what the next 18 months will genuinely look like. But I want to give you some introspective thoughts on where I see this moving. The saying is more true than ever. Change may be difficult, but changing not at all is absolutely fatal. Now, you're going to hear people talk about this more and more and more today. So what I want to do with you is I do want to give you a brief intro into where I'm seeing the world, but more importantly, I want to leave you with what it means for us in the everyday world. I want you to go back with me for a little bit. I want to show you that I believe time is speeding up. Do you feel it? Time is speeding up. I say that because if I just look at the frequency of innovation in the last 10 years, it has dramatically increased. Would you agree? In fact, the gaps between major innovations is just getting shorter each time. And we can actually prove that time is speeding up by doing a simple test. If I look back at this picture, it represents time maybe back, say, 50,000 years ago. And for me, back then, time was flat and slow. It was local and it was linear. Anything that impacted these people happened within the proximity of about 100 or 200 kilometers. If it happened any further, did they know about it? So life was very localized. It was also very linear because if you just compared the difference between generations there, maybe the difference between how a grandparent and a grandchild lived, there wasn't much change over the years. In 2017 and beyond, it's a different world. Our lives are no longer localized. If something happens anywhere else around the world right now, we will know about it seconds to minutes later. If something really big happens, we will know it literally, everybody in this room, but before we walk out. So we definitely don't live in a localized world anymore. In fact, you can see sometimes what happens to the South African rand, sometimes caused by our own issues, but oftentimes connected because we are connected to an emerging market world. Sometimes what happens in Brazil or China directly impacts us, even though it didn't happen here. The election of Trump sent the rand skyrocketing. It's crazy. We don't live in a local world anymore. And we now certainly live in an exponential world. And that is a word that I want to focus on with you today because I don't think that human beings have a full grasp of that term. In fact, I think it's been bastardized, much similar to the word innovation. So we've definitely moved from local and linear to global and exponential. I'm 33 years old. If I just stop and compare my life, how I was brought up, compared to my parents, compared to my grandparents, these lives look nothing alike. If any of you have had a baby in the last 6 months or year, that child's life is going to look so much more dramatically different than yours. The gap is about to increase. Do you agree with that? So any of you know what Moore's law is all about? There's this guy called Gordon Moore. He co-founded Intel in 1958. In 1965, he made this famous observation. He noted that the number of transistors on a circuit board were doubling every 12 to 18 months. In simple English, if you can have a look over here, believe it or not, this is the beginning of the piece of hardware that now powers your phone. That's what the first one looked like, a whole 2 transistors. In 1971, the first commercial unit came out, a massive jump from 2 to 2,300. That's not linear improvement, would you agree? Well, if we just fast forward to 2012, there was a major dramatic improvement on, suddenly to 7.1 billion transistors, whereas in 1971, a transistor was costing you about $1 per transistor, now less than 1/10 of a cent. That's very 2012, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just look at hard drives for 2 split seconds. That's one of the first hard drives, 5 megs. It's about if you have my phone, an iPhone 7, and you take a picture on its highest quality, that's what you get, 5 meg picture, which meant you needed a cargo airplane to take your picture from office to office. And it would cost you everything you had back in 1956, $120,000. Can you understand that we had improved so significantly that 128 megs could fit on your pinky for a fraction of the price in 2005. Well, what happens with Moore's law is this continues. This price performance doubles every 12 to 18 months. And in 2014, we could fit 1,000 times that on your pinky for the same price. And what made Gordon Moore's observation famous wasn't just that he noted that price performance was doubling. It's that he made this famous saying, he said, and it's likely to continue. And as it's worked out to this day, it has. Moore's law continues to improve at that rate. Why am I telling you all of this? Well, if you agree with me that time is speeding up, then you'd have to say what's happening here is that digitization is speeding the world up. And there's a very specific reason I want to tell you that. Because I want you to understand it's not just what digitization is doing, or what it is, it's what it does. This term, innovation, it gets thrown around all the time. I want to simplify it for you. I believe that time is speeding up on the back of the fact that innovation is increasing in frequency. And the reason that's happening is because innovation increases in speed on the back of the speed at which human beings share information with each other. What I'm trying to say in simple English is, do you remember that picture of 50,000 years ago? We agree that they lived local and linear lives. And that's because information was super slow to be shared between human beings. If you weren't within earshot, you didn't hear it. In other words, innovation or information moved around at the speed of the campfire 50,000 years ago. If someone came up with a new technique on how to keep fire burning for longer, but you didn't see them for a month, you didn't know about it. It's that simple. You can see that the world started to speed up in direct correlation to the speed at which human beings could share information with each other. So, if we look at the printing press, the Gutenberg moment was a major shift in humanity. Why? Because for the first time, we didn't have to write out each book. It was almost the dawn of the first industrial revolution because suddenly we could scale information faster and farther. Would you agree? Well, this continued. If you consider what happened with the telegraph and the telephone, every time these major innovations took place, what they did was they allowed human beings to share information with each other faster. But the reality of the matter is that now we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a world where information has become digitized, which means it's moving at the speed of the internet, which is the fastest it's ever moved. And to add to that, it scales and it replicates perfectly. In other words, if I write a book, but I digitize that book, I know without fail, as long as I've sent out that one copy, it replicates as many times as I need it to. There's never a fault. There's never a difference. It all comes out the same way. Would you agree? So I can move information faster and farther than ever before in the universe. And suddenly what you have is this explosion of innovation. Because how it's impacting us is that we know about everything that's happening in the world like this. What's super interesting is if we go back here, what we can note is that although Gordon Moore observed Moore's law in 1965, this idea of the price performance doubling every 12 to 18 months actually goes back to about the year 1900. So although he may have observed it, he didn't create it. This has been happening for a much longer time than we're used to. And what's most important that you need to know about this is this. Anytime technology empowers human beings to do more and know more, we won't go back. That's why innovation had such an even and steady progression going back all the way to the year 1900, despite wars, despite recessions, and despite ups and downs in the semiconductor industry. Are you with me what I'm saying? Innovation has not been blocked since about the year 1900, despite two major world wars. Wouldn't you expect that a world war would kind of make innovation have much more of a stock market shape to it? You would think that it would slow it down just a little bit, but it didn't. How about 4 or 5 major recessions in the last 100 years? Wouldn't that impact on innovation? Anytime technology empowers people to do more or know more, we won't go back. That's why it doesn't matter what car salesman people say. You and I love using the internet to understand what our next car will be. The salesman has just become the authoritative figure who helps you facilitate the sale. He's not the be-all and the end-all of the information. He's the only one who's on the wrong side of it. Does that make sense? So you've really got to decide which side are you on this. And most times what happens is it's difficult to tell. I even want to go one further. This is a graph that shows you how many devices are connecting to the internet and talking to each other. I would argue that this is not just that graph. It's equally a graph telling you it's in direct correlation to the fact that time is speeding up. I think you can pinpoint how time is speeding up in direct relation to the number of devices that are digitized and talking to each other on the internet. So where does that leave us as human beings? Well, it turns out that we aren't particularly good at understanding this rate of change. We just simply aren't. And do you want to know why? Because if you look at humanity on a mass scale, we've evolved in linear environments over hundreds of thousands of years. And only in the last 40 or 50 years have we been dropped into this world of exponential improvement. In other words, what you and I are facing as a society, as humanity, is a rate of change that no one before us has ever seen. And as a result, if you agree with me that time is speeding up, innovation is increasing in frequency, the gaps are getting shorter, the world is moving and speeding up, if you agree with that, then you'd have to agree that the rules have changed and that we can't look back anymore to understand where to go coming forward. So yes, indeed, it has caused this impact on us. It's highly disruptive and it causes us stress because we're just not used to this and we have no blueprint. And the more you look back to go forward, the bigger of a mess it is. I call it the broken rearview mirror syndrome. Looking back is a dead way of thinking. So, are there any benefits? Well, I argue absolutely. The simple trick is this. There are two things that are happening as we speak. One is while it is causing the average human being massive disruptive stress because this rate of change is unfamiliar to us, it's also creating mass opportunity and it is starting to democratize the world. I use this example of Kodak, when in reality, thanks to digitization, how many people in this picture do not have a digital camera? You see, in the old days, photography used to work upon scarcity. Not everybody had a camera, not everybody could have one. But thanks to a heap of convergence, right, not just within digital cameras, but in all other spheres, what you suddenly have is that everybody here is a photographer. And thanks to Snapchat filters, Instagram filters, can be incredible photographers. They can take pictures that photographers of yesteryear could only dream of. Photography is not the only space where digitization is bringing about democracy. There are many other places. What do you think WhatsApp did to the telecoms industry in the last 10 years? Just look at those stats. It's frightening to see. Here's the fact. In South Africa, we live in we live in the most unequal society in the world by measure of the Gini coefficient. The gap between rich and poor is the widest it's ever been in any country, and we're it. Despite that, I can talk to almost anyone in the same way, assuming they have a phone and WhatsApp. How many people do you know that don't have a phone or WhatsApp? What you have is, thanks to digitization, communication is becoming democratized. And this is what happens, is that digitization, indirectly, wherever it goes, it starts to bring scale. But before it brings scale, it brings deception upon people. What do I mean by that? Most times when something becomes digitized, we look at it and we don't take it seriously because those early versions are clunky. That's what happened to Kodak. It's what sunk them. They looked at that camera that could take 0.01 megapixel shots that were only black and white in 23 seconds, and they said, what could this do? And because in that early phase, it takes long to get going. But once it gets going, you can't stop it. And rarely do people see ahead. So what regularly happens is that this change comes at you, you dismiss it, and when you realize as to what it's doing, it's too late because everything you do from there is reactive. So the measure of what I'm trying to explain to you is that we need to start thinking how to shift our brains exponentially, understanding that it's not natural for us. Does that make sense? What I know without question is that for the first time ever in humanity, technology is actually starting to deflate industries. So in the old days, when the horse got replaced by a car. Yes, there were some job losses here, but they were revived on this side. This is the story we've been told for over 100 years, that where technology takes away jobs on one side, technology replaces on the other. I'm telling you today that that's come to an end. Because the fact of the matter is, WhatsApp alone deflated the telecoms industry by the tune of about $100 billion over the last however many. Do you remember the SMS revenues that just even our own providers used to experience? So WhatsApp took that away, but what did it replace it with? Yes, maybe data, but is it keeping up? Because data in itself is becoming democratized. We're not entering into a time where you're going to go to less and less Wi-Fi hotspots, despite the best efforts of all South African businesses. We're entering into a space where more and more people will have Wi-Fi. When I started my first business, there was no such thing as going to a coffee shop and sitting there for 4 hours. This wasn't that long ago. This was 9 years ago, because they didn't have the internet speeds. And if they did, they certainly wouldn't share it because data was expensive. But at the end of all digitization cycles is what we call democracy. Good for some, horrific for others. Today, I'm asking which side you're on. This is my example of what WhatsApp is doing to the industry. SpaceX are saying quite simply, how about we take this notion away from all the companies in the world trying to grab profit only? This happened in the last 6 months. Elon Musk saying, how about what we're going to do is we're going to put up 4,500 satellites in low orbit Earth, which isn't typically done because right now there are only 1,500 satellites in the entire external orbit in the first place. So in just this project alone, he's wanting to quadruple that. His thinking is that the more people who have free, fast internet access, the more connected we are, the better this world will be. He's just taking it upon himself. I think the Vodacoms, in fact, it's not the Vodacoms, the telecommunications industry at large are even to this day being highly reactive. I'm amazed that someone didn't buy WhatsApp. Think about it. They saw this coming along, but it took an exponentially facing company called Facebook to see it. Not one of the telcos saw it was coming ahead and were willing to spend the money. That's going to be their death. Right now, their space is to grab. And I'm talking worldwide. I'm not pointing fingers. They're grabbing because I don't see the innovation. By the way, this is not only just limited to the likes of Elon Musk. Google and Virgin Group are both on their own planes. Google with the lunar balloons, Virgin with their own galactic space hubs. People are jumping at free communication from all ends. And when you suddenly have free communication, you have an incredible thing at your hands. Because you must understand that today, capitalism is held up by 3 pillars. It's held up by the pace at which we communicate, the cost of energy, and the cost of transportation. When you start to look at these 3 pillars, and you look at it over the last few industrial revolutions, you see that they were old, flat, and slow. But what you're moving toward is that capitalism in its own right is moving to a space where it's being crippled by the fact that communication is almost free. With renewable energy, we're moving to a space where energy is almost free. And when you have energy that is almost free, you suddenly move into a space where water comes at almost no cost, because suddenly we don't rely on rain, we rely on desalination plants, which are traditionally very expensive, but not now when you've got an abundance of energy. And what happens when you can get anywhere in the world at any time at almost no cost? These are the 3 pillars that are barely holding up what we have known to be capitalism. And they are crumbling. In fact, it was ironic because as I was researching for this talk, I found an article on the Guardian newspaper website, and they were asking for fees. I had to throw this in there. We have a small favor to ask. Most people are reading The Guardian. More people are reading The Guardian than ever, but advertising revenues across the media are falling fast. Do you see this? I feel for them, but this is what we call a reaction to the market. They have lost power because their existence relies on, please help. Not, we have innovated, we have thought, and boy, do we have something new for you. Do you want to be in that position? I wouldn't want to be The Guardian if you paid me all the money in the world. I wouldn't want to be powerless, hoping other people will help. That's what happens when you don't understand the exponential move. Is your arse on fire yet? talking about transportation. I use Uber as an example, but there are many companies trying to do this. The bottom line is that Uber is single-handedly trying to remove the driver out of the vehicle and create an autonomous vehicle. You want to know why? Because that 200 Rand trip that it took me from my house to here would come down to a tenth of that price, 20 Rand. When you start to factor in this other converging technology called renewable energy, it drops another tenth to about 10 Rand. I have to ask you, if every trip that used to cost you 200 Rand suddenly costed you between 10 and 15, would you own the vehicle? I wouldn't. Not just from a cost perspective. Why would I want to lose that time? I'm not joking. In my lifetime and beyond, what you've had is a drop of over 250 times in price in solar. It is now cheaper as we speak in places like India and Mexico to create a solar plant by half without subsidies than coal plants. See, that's not just what's impressive. It's the rate that it's going to continue to go down. What happens if the car never has to stop? What happens if we combine these converging technologies? Do you understand one of the key things that happens within digitization is this? You see this phone? This phone is one device today, but it was multiple devices 30 years ago. Do you agree? Separate phone, calculator, encyclopedia, record player, map book, all of these things were physical. Then one by one, they became digitized. As they became digitized, they started to converge on top of each other into now this thing we call a phone, which is quite ironic because we never do that with it. When you look at it from that perspective, the problem that you have is that you're never sure where your next line of competition is coming. Because an entire taxi industry technically got disrupted by 3 software engineers sitting in another part of the world. So these guys who are hating on Uber just in South Africa alone, they can't even tell that their competition happened halfway around the world. They couldn't even see it. They were like looking and scanning the market. Who are the other taxi companies that are coming in? Who are they and what are they doing? And we laugh. But the problem with that level of convergence is that neither do you know where your next level of competition is. How about blockchain? It's something that every human being in this room should be studying and understanding to the depth. Simply saying, oh, no, that's not my vibe. That's not the kind of thing that I get involved in. That's going to be the death of you. Because the fact of the matter is what's happening is that for the first time ever, these forms of technology are democratizing the world and allowing people to do as they please without the help of massive institutions. I genuinely believe this. The pillars of capitalism are folding. But we can't see it because we're looking back and saying, oh, well, in the past, how these things happened was the following. So we'll be fine. But if you look at everything I'm saying to you, and you're just willing to examine it just a little bit deeper, you understand that the rules have entirely changed. And so what's to come will never be what has happened before. Where does that leave us? I want to give you some examples of all types of people. There are pros and cons to all of this. Do you remember the old days when you used to buy a movie ticket from a person? It wasn't that long ago, people. What happened was about 2 years ago, you could still walk into any new metro or any Ster-Kinekor at any point in time and say, oh, there's Thor. I'd like 2 tickets for that time, those seats. Here's my money. It didn't matter at that point in time how good or bad you were at your job. You just got replaced. And you want to know why? Because you can't out-process the speed and the efficiency that this thing works. See, the technology scales in ways we couldn't. These machines, they never get tired. They never give you lip. And if one does, you just use the next. It never needs a bathroom break. It never goes out for a sneaky cigarette. It doesn't get tired. Are you following me? It doesn't matter how good you are at what you do. You can't out-process this thing. And why wouldn't companies leverage off of this technology? People talk poorly of these types of companies. Oh, they're just trying to get rid of people. I don't think so. But they are trying to wring out efficiencies within their business. And if it was my business, in this capitalistic model, of course I'd be playing by those rules. I'd be wanting to use this technology because this moves farther and faster. And once I pay it, it's paid. I don't have to keep paying this thing a salary in 3 months' time when it's paid off. 6 months? Your next wave of competition isn't always where it's coming from. It's not what you're used to. You see, I believe, and I'm biased, so take it from whence it comes, that the only reason big organizations used to exist is because big organizations were the only entities that could get the big jobs done. What I'm saying in simple English is, if you go back to 30 or 40 years ago, having a company with 5,000 staff meant you had 5,000 horsepower. But today, 10 people plus some technology, 10 people plus degreed, 10 people plus some form of software created equals 5,000 horsepower. It's cliched, but it's true. That's the only reason Uber managed to disrupt the taxi industry, and it's the only reason Airbnb could literally topple the entire accommodation industry, because they had tech that scaled far faster. So where does that leave us? Because the entire world is moving toward a space where suddenly they can almost freelance. I run this organization called Suits and Sneakers. Sometimes when we run big events, I've gotten up to 3,500 people into one room at one point. In May, I had an event with 3,500 people at the Santa Convention Center. The irony is that one person got that amount of people there, but not one person. One person plus technology got 3,500 people there. How would one human being, no matter how bright that human being could be, get 3,500 people to one place within about 3 months with no help and no money otherwise 30 years ago? So 10 people plus tech equals 5,000 horsepower. But here's the deal. The problem for big companies is that suddenly, if you agree that time is speeding up and these changes are coming at you at this pace, how do you compete with that pace when you're a big organization that can't move fast? The reason I'm telling you all of this is quite simply because I believe that the world is moving into this new era. And I'm not just thumb-sucking this and hoping. I'm telling you that the time has come for organizations to act in a heart-led manner. I'm telling you that you have no choice but to change and but to move. But those who do it for the right reasons are actually the ones who are going to come out perfect in the end. Those companies who are heart-led. I have a very good friend named John. He calls what I'm about to tell you about the horny teenage boy syndrome. He says that all companies, and I love it, which is why I have to see this, all companies these days have incredible value propositions and mission statements. They all want to change the world. They're all about customers first. They're all about profits later until that quarterly sales figure comes in and they're short. Then the sales managers are like, get out there and nigh everything you can to make that sale. Get out there and literally have sex with anything to get more money. I don't know if you ladies would agree with me, but have you ever been out in a place and there's this man who's looking at you with those come to bed eyes? Nothing is attractive about it. Would you agree? When you can feel him breathing on you. Nothing. The person who comes right is the one who plays the longer game. And we never used to have metrics that rewarded that. Now you have no choice because you're entering into a new time, a new place. So I'm often asked, well, where to from here? And I'd like to split this into two sides for you. One is let's talk about you as an individual, and then let's talk about you as companies. First, you must simply understand that if you don't have context to what's going on, you will simply be disrupted. Right now, what happens is that most people living around the world are living in their little bubbles. Do you know that bubble? I wake up, I get ready for work, I go to work, I do my work, I come home from work, and then when it comes to the weekend, I drink because of work. Know what I'm talking about? Where are your new input systems? Where are the values coming from? Where is the source of information that's coming and showing you? The truth is, what I've seen is that change won't happen if you don't first understand yourself and what's happening in around the world. That's why more than ever, the time has come for you to take responsibility for the way your head operates. Again, as my good friend John says, you're either a victim or a victor. You're either a victim or an architect of the future, but there is no gray area. And for you to become that, you have to understand each and every one of your little habits, because effectively you as a human being, what you are is just a series of habits. That's all you are. You are a series of learned behaviors. So that tiny little thing, that tiny little, I'll have a quick piece of chocolate cake when no one's looking. It's a little habit that becomes a ritual, that becomes a behavior, that becomes your personality, that becomes your mind. And if you can't track that back, it doesn't matter what I say to you. It matters nothing. You simply won't take this information in. But I'm sure you won't be asking me for a job. Tech will be doing that. So as individuals, and even as companies, if you can't afford to stop and take an introspective look inward to understand what's happening, being honest, because in this world of technological socialism, that's what we're moving away from capitalism to technological socialism. If you can't stop and look inward and understand where you're at in position to the world, you're dead. But those that do, frightening amounts of opportunities. If we could all go back 10 years ago to the dawn of where the app world was starting to open and smartphones and data, if we could have taken a solid look back then and said, stop, let's understand where this thing's going, in reality, the world would be very different. Not everybody did, but a few people did, and they are billionaires today. And we live in a time that before, if you came up with a good idea, you had to climb this long mountain. There was no shortcut. Today, there is. All disruption starts with introspection. If you can't stop and think about this, you're gone. And then I have to say, I agree with these guys emphatically. In fact, my relationship with Alexander Forbes started on the back of education. And the truth is, I have a very different take on what education is. Because when I say the word education to most people, their response is education is that thing that happens at schools or universities. And I disagree entirely. My definition is quite simple. Education is simply the act or the process of researching the future. The reason you send your kids to school is to understand what's to come and be valuable enough to solve a problem there. When you start to look at what's coming and what we're learning, there's a major disconnect. But thanks to digitization, what's happening is there is a dawn of the democracy of education. Harvard, incredible institution. MIT, amazing. You know what the mess is? There's only one of them. We need 50,000 of them. We only have one. Great. That level of education, untouchable anywhere else on earth. But who gives a shit? Because it doesn't scale. And we don't need an education predicated on scarcity. We need an educational system predicated on democracy. For the first time, if you're waiting for your learning to be bestowed upon you, you're dead. By the way, I specifically didn't wear the Alexander Forbes shirt today so that I could tell you your fortunes and then run away. But do you hear what I'm saying to you? For the first time, you've got this information at your fingertips. Have you ever thought about it, why it is that you earn what you earn or your company turns what it turns? My argument is that everything that you make up until this point, your salary, we didn't just like pop a balloon and hope whatever number's in this balloon you get. It got there somehow. It was clearly some form of negotiation between employee and employer. Would you agree? And in fairness, in the free market world, what has happened is there is a negotiation when you put out a price for a service or product, people are either willing to pay it on the value of the problem it solves or not. So right now, the prices that people pay and what you earn as an individual, not an accident. And I'll tell you, it's in direct correlation to the problem, the value of the problem that you solve. You earn according to the value of the problem that you solve. And I'm starting to say to you for two reasons. As an individual and as a company, if you don't take your own self-directed learning progress seriously, you're dead. Because a company is made up of a group of people who are seeing what's to come. If that group of people don't understand, the company won't understand. And in your own life, if you're just sitting there like the new Metro / Ster-Kinekor Cortella saying to the world, I do a great job, it's just a matter of time because you're stuck in your own space that you can't see where the disruption comes from. One day you have the job and then one day you don't. And then everything you're doing from there is reactive. What I'm trying to explain to you is that the number one thing we need to understand about the world moving forward is above EQ and above IQ especially, is AQ, your adaptability quotient. If you don't have the understanding of how the world is changing and the ability to speed up according to that direction, if you can't pivot, do you understand that companies have been built up until now on the idea of what am I good at or what are my competitors doing? I would call that we create according to our capability or to our competition. And I'm saying because of all the pillars of capitalism crumbling, there needs to be a new train of thought. That thought is based around what are the problems out there that need to be solved? Let us do that. And if we don't have the skills necessary, let's pivot, let's learn, let's understand. Because Kodak stopped waiting for the future. Kodak said, oh, this cute little digital camera business, yeah, why would we spend a lot of time and money on that when we've got this behemoth called film and photography? How did that work out? In today's world, your ability to adapt matters more than anything. So if you as entities have to start reorganizing and reshaping in order to adapt quicker, that's on you. But if you don't, no one cares because there'll be someone smaller, more agile, more tech-focused, more up-to-date with the context of the world, ready to take it. And they won't even be looking for going after you. They'll just be trying to solve a problem. That's how come you can never see where your competition comes from. Do you remember these guys? I'm so glad you laughed. Let me introduce something called humble pie, and you may now eat it. BlackBerry, yes, BlackBerry is making a comeback as a software company. Shattered expectations from analysts. Their stock price is on the rise because their CEO came into this game, realized they had no future in that game. They simply weren't going to compete with Apple and Android. They started reshaping according to a value of a problem they can solve. They didn't, however, say, well, we're good at phones, so that's all we'll do. We'll just make better phones. They stopped that. And in fact, they looked around and said, software is where it's at. And it turns out that we've actually built indirectly an incredible skill in developing software, but we can totally converge into other areas. And they're making that comeback. My point to you is this, that speed indeed matters, but it only matters if you're going in the right direction. So me coming back to you is this. I think the world is moving at this incredible pace. Do you agree? There's no argument. Okay, if we agree on that, let's move to the next premise. On the back of this world changing, the rules are different. We can't look back to go forward, which means the rules, they don't count anymore. They count in various circles. It's not to say that we walk into the office and say, to hell with everything we know, and we're just doing it differently. But you'd have to say, looking forward, you'd have to say that the rules have changed. Do we agree that the rules have changed and are continuing to change? Then I'd like to leave you with these points. The point is this. Number one, you need to go on your own learning journey to understand. And if you don't think that education, and more specific learning in the workplace, needs a dramatic overhaul because of how important it is, you're missing the biggest trick. Because what you still have is an army of people who, if they're moving in the right direction, you can be incredibly powerful. If you understand that the rules are changing, there are no more rules. We work according to the human condition. What is the value of the problem I can solve? Does that need you to move several times? Because when self-driving cars come in and you're an insurance company that just keeps offering lower and lower premiums, I mean, clearly the market's telling you I don't want to own a vehicle. And by the way, that curve, it happens. It goes slow, 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 slow. We don't think anything of it, and then it falls off a cliff. And then you're reactive. From companies, I can't stress this enough. You will become known for entities because of how heart-led or how not heart-led you were. The truth of the matter is we need to move toward what we call cathedral thinking. Do you know what that is? That's the idea that in the old days, when you started building a church, your grandchildren finished the project. It was a long game. And the companies, It used to be a nice to have, play the long game, do nice things, etc. But in the world we're moving to, I argue it's the only way you will survive. Because what's happening is technology is democratizing the entire world. It's leaving us as human beings and as individuals with more option and more choice than ever before. There's without question. And we won't go back. If something enables us to do more, be more, know more, understand more, we won't go back. And so for the first time, we're the ones who are spoiled for choice. And companies that don't pander accordingly, they simply won't survive because someone else who's small and waiting, who sees the problem, will simply find a piece of tech to solve the problem. And they'll do it faster than you and farther than you. You think money is a problem? Try crowdfunding. Try any different way that people can now share information with each other. And therein leaves you. My name is Mark Sham. I hope that for this morning, I've just given you just a brief perspective of what's to come. I hope more than anything, I've antagonized you. That was my aim. So don't feel nunus. I wanted to hurt your feelings. And you want to know why? Human beings fundamentally do not shift without pain. Just the God-given right. So enjoy the pain or don't. Be disrupted or be the disruptor. But mark my words, these things will come true. If you want to continue the conversation with me, I'm very active on these channels and I'd love to hash it out. Thank you.